The first indicator that my life had been dismantled didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or a loud knock at the door. It came at 7:14 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday, in the form of a quiet, metallic ping from my phone. I was standing in the kitchen of my home, holding a cup of black coffee, watching the rain streak the glass of the back door. I had just authorized a routine $120,000 wire transfer from my primary operating account to cover the quarterly payroll taxes for my 75 employees. It was a mechanical, weekly habit. I pressed submit on the banking app, set the phone down on the granite counter, and took a sip of coffee. The ping sounded. I glanced at the screen, expecting the standard green checkmark notification. Instead, there was a stark gray text box. Error code 409. Transaction declined. Account restricted. I put the coffee mug down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the stone counter. The banks do not restrict commercial accounts with six-figure daily balances over minor security triggers. I picked up the phone, bypassed the app, and logged directly into the bank's secure web portal. The loading wheel spun for 3 agonizing seconds. When the dashboard finally populated, the screen was flooded with red typography. Every single account, my commercial operating fund, my personal checking, my emergency savings, even the escrow account holding client deposits, had a bold red padlock icon next to it. Available balance, $0. Status, frozen, legal levy/writ of attachment. A cold, heavy knot formed at the base of my stomach. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I didn't panic, but my heart rate accelerated, a purely biological response to a survival threat. Someone had just turned off the oxygen to my entire life. I immediately dialed the direct extension for my private banker, David. He answered on the first ring, which was worse than if he had let it go to voicemail. "I'm looking at my dashboard, David," I said, my voice tight, forcing the words out evenly. "Every account is locked. I have payroll taxes due by 5 p.m. today, and I cannot move a single cent. Explain the error." There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint, frantic clicking of his keyboard, followed by a heavy exhale. "It's not an error," David said, his voice dropping into the hushed or careful tone bankers use when dealing with a legal catastrophe. "I just got into the office and the paperwork is already on my desk. We received an emergency ex parte writ of attachment at 6 a.m. directly from the county civil court. A judge ordered a hard freeze on all your liquid assets up to the amount of $650,000. I leaned heavily against the granite counter. The cold from the stone seeped through my shirt. An ex parte order? A judge froze my accounts without even notifying me or allowing me a hearing. Who is the petitioner? I heard paper shuffling over the speaker. The petitioner is Elise Harding. The underlying claim is a defaulted promissory note and alleged fraudulent concealment of assets. The name hit me like a physical blow to the ribs. The phone slipped slightly in my grip. Elise, my younger sister. "Send me the docket number," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And I hung up the phone before he could offer empty apologies. I didn't waste time calling my corporate lawyers. A lawyer would take 3 hours to draft a motion just to look at the file. I needed the raw data, and I needed it immediately. I grabbed my car keys, ignored the umbrella by the door, and walked out into the freezing November rain. The county courthouse was a brutalist concrete building that smelled constantly of wet wool, floor wax, and ozone from the overheating copy machines. I bypassed the metal detectors through the expedited attorney line, walked straight to the civil records window, and handed the clerk a slip of paper with the docket number. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at a scarred wooden table in the dimly lit records reading room, a thick manila folder resting open in front of me. My clothes were damp, sticking uncomfortably to my skin, but I didn't feel the chill. All my focus was funneled into the black ink on the pages, and I read Elise's sworn affidavit first. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction, designed perfectly to bypass a judge's skepticism. In it, Elise claimed that 7 years ago, when I was struggling to keep my logistics company afloat during its first turbulent year, she'd loaned me her entire inheritance, $500,000. She claimed we signed a private promissory note, with the stipulation that I would repay the principal plus heavy interest the moment my company reached a $5 million valuation. The affidavit continued with a fabricated, highly detailed narrative, claiming that I had reached that valuation 6 months ago, violently refused to pay her back, and was currently in the process of secretly wiring my liquid assets to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands to avoid my debt to her. To prove this imminent flight risk, she attached doctored emails supposedly sent from my IP address inquiring about offshore shell companies. It was enough manufactured panic to convince a tired civil judge to sign an emergency asset freeze at dawn. Elise knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that by freezing my operating capital right before quarterly taxes and payroll, I would be legally suffocated. If I didn't pay the IRS and my employees by the end of the week, my business would face federal penalties, strikes, and an eventual liquidation. She had put a gun to the head of my company, demanding a $650,000 ransom to release the trigger. I turned the page and looked at the core evidence. Exhibit A, the promissory note. It was printed on standard, heavy stock legal paper. It was dated October 14, 2018. It outlined the $500,000 loan, the interest rates, and the repayment triggers. And at the bottom of the page, resting on the signature line, was my name. I stared at the signature. I leaned in, bringing my face inches from the paper under the harsh fluorescent light of the reading room. The signature wasn't a clumsy imitation. It was flawless. The sharp, aggressive angle of the first letter, the slight fade of the ink at the end of the surname, the specific pressure of the loop. It was undeniably my handwriting. For a terrifying, disorienting second, my own memory faltered. Did I sign this? I forced the panic down. I grounded myself in facts. I built my company with bank loans and venture capital. I never took a dime from my sister. I ran my index finger lightly over the signature. The blue ink was completely flat against the paper. I looked closer at the specific break in the letter T in my last name. On October 12, 2018, 2 days before the date on this fake note, I had signed a massive 40-page commercial lease agreement for my first warehouse. On page 32 of that lease, my pen had snagged on a microscopic fiber in the paper, causing a tiny, almost invisible skip in the crossbar of the T. I was looking at that exact same skip right now. Elise hadn't practiced my signature. She had physically stolen the 2018 warehouse lease from my old home office files, scanned page 32 with a high-resolution optical scanner, digitally isolated my signature, and laser printed it onto this fabricated document. It was an exceptional, highly illegal piece of forgery. But in her meticulous effort to make the signature look 7 years old, she had made a catastrophic physical error in the production of the document itself. I didn't look at the signature anymore. I looked at the specific heavy stock paper she had printed the contract on. I looked at the bright, vibrant blue ink she had used to forge the notary stamp next to my name. A slow, cold smile crept onto my face. The sheer, suffocating weight of the frozen bank accounts lifted, replaced by the razor-sharp clarity of an impending kill. I closed the manila folder. I didn't need a lawyer to negotiate a settlement. I needed a forensic materials laboratory. I walked out of the records room and back into the freezing rain. The damp cold cut through my clothes, but my mind was entirely insulated, running a rapid, sequential algorithm. Elise had filed a copy of the forged promissory note with the initial affidavit to secure the emergency asset freeze. But in civil litigation, when a photocopy is not enough to secure a final judgment, especially when the defendant contests the signature, the court requires the physical original document to be entered into evidence. Elise's lawyer would be holding the original in his firm's safe, waiting to present it at the preliminary injunction hearing scheduled for Friday morning. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, the heater blasting warm air against my numb hands. I pulled out my phone and called my corporate litigator, Marcus. And he picked up immediately, already speaking before I could say a word. "I saw the county filing hit the digital docket 10 minutes ago," Marcus said, the rapid clicking of his keyboard echoing over the line. "A $650,000 ex parte freeze on all operating accounts. It's a textbook strangulation tactic. We need to file an emergency motion to lift the levy immediately. If we offer a surety bond—" "No," I interrupted, my voice flat and steady, cutting through his legal panic. "We don't negotiate a bond. We don't defend against the debt. I want you to file a single, highly specific emergency motion for expedited discovery. Demand the immediate surrender of the original physical promissory note for independent forensic examination." Marcus stopped typing. The line went quiet for a few seconds. "You're claiming forgery? If her lawyer is halfway competent, he'll fight the surrender. He'll argue it's a delay tactic to move assets. He can argue whatever he wants," I replied, staring at the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers. "Draft the motion. Cite Rule 34 of the Rules of Civil Procedure. I have a fundamental right to inspect the physical evidence being used to bankrupt my company. Or force a judge to order the physical transfer of that document to the Sterling Forensic Laboratory by tomorrow morning." "Sterling is the most expensive materials lab in the state," Marcus warned, his tone shifting from frantic to analytical. "They require a $10,000 retainer up front, and my firm needs another $15,000 to execute the emergency filings today. Your cash accounts are completely locked by the county levy." "The levy restricts liquid deposit accounts," I corrected him, pulling my wallet from my bag. "It does not restrict corporate credit facilities. Run the $25,000 on the corporate Platinum American Express. It's a revolving credit line. The county has no jurisdiction to freeze debt. Just get that original piece of paper into a sterile laboratory." "Consider it done," Marcus said, the line clicking dead. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the courthouse. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat. The screen illuminated with a new text message. "Elise, we need to talk. I didn't want it to come to this, but you left me no choice. Meet me at the Mercer Cafe near your office at noon. Let's fix this before your payroll bounces." I stared at the glowing text at the red light. The sheer engineered manipulation of the message was sickening. She had spent weeks plotting a catastrophic financial ambush, executed it at dawn to maximize the damage, and was now positioning herself as the reluctant savior offering a way out. I typed a single word in response: "Fine." The Mercer Cafe was a quiet, overpriced espresso bar frequented by executives trying to conduct discreet business. I arrived 10 minutes late. Elise was already sitting at a corner booth. She wasn't hiding from the guilt of what she had done. She was basking in it. She wore a brand new, camel hair designer coat draped casually over the back of her chair, a purchase likely made on credit, heavily anticipating her impending $650,000 payday. I slid into the leather booth opposite her. I didn't order anything. "You look exhausted," Elise noted, resting her hands on the table. Her voice carried a thick layer of manufactured sympathy, but her eyes were bright, wide with the adrenaline of finally having the upper hand. "Unlock the accounts, Elise," I said, keeping my posture rigid. My voice carefully pitched to simulate a woman barely holding off a panic attack. "It's Thursday. I have 75 employees who have rent due tomorrow. If that payroll wire doesn't clear by 5 p.m., the State Labor Board will trigger an automatic audit, and my vendors will put a stop work order on our supply chain. You are burning down the entire company." Elise sighed, a long, theatrical exhale. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp, 2-page document, was sliding it across the polished wood table toward me. "I'm not burning anything down. You are," she said smoothly, tapping her manicured fingernail against the top of the page. "This is a standard settlement agreement. My lawyer drafted it an hour ago. You sign this, acknowledging the original $500,000 debt plus the $150,000 in accrued interest and legal penalties. You authorize the bank to wire the funds directly to my account. The moment the wire clears, my lawyer files a withdrawal of the levy. Your accounts unlock. Your employees get paid. The bleeding stops. I looked down at the settlement. It was a flawless extortion mechanism. By signing it, I wouldn't just be losing $650,000. I would be legally confessing to a fabricated debt, permanently destroying my own credibility and validating her fraud. "I didn't borrow that money, Elise," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I let my hands tremble slightly as I touched the edge of the paper. It wasn't hard to fake the physical reaction. The anger burning in my chest provided all the necessary kinetic energy. "You know I didn't." Elise leaned forward, dropping the sympathetic facade. The raw, bitter resentment she had harbored for years finally bled through. "Nobody cares what you actually did," she whispered back, her eyes locking onto mine with a cold, triumphant glare. "The judge looked at the promissory note. Hard, he looked at your signature. He looked at the supposed emails, and he gave me the keys to your bank accounts. You spent your whole life acting like you were untouchable just because you built a company. Now you have exactly 24 hours to realize that you are completely at my mercy." She sat back, taking a slow sip of her latte, savoring the taste of the leverage. "Sign the paper, take it to your lawyer, and pay me," Elise instructed, checking her phone and standing up from the booth. "Or don't, and watch your employees walk out tomorrow afternoon. It's your choice." She walked out of the cafe, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully behind her. I sat alone in the booth for a long time. I carefully folded the extortion demand, placed it into my bag, and walked out into the rain. I didn't go to my office. I drove directly to the industrial park on the outskirts of the city. The Sterling Forensic Laboratory didn't look like a law firm. It was a secured, almost windowless concrete facility that processed physical evidence for federal contractors and high-stakes corporate litigation. I swiped my visitor badge and was escorted into a sterile, brightly lit examination room. Dr. Aris, a forensic materials engineer with a background in federal treasury investigations, was waiting for me. He didn't wear a suit. He wore a white anti-static lab coat. On the metal examination table between us rested the original, physical promissory note that Marcus had successfully subpoenaed from Elise's lawyer 2 hours prior. The document was encased in a clear, static-free Mylar sleeve, resting under the massive lens of a binocular stereo microscope. "Your counsel requested an expedited destructive-free material analysis," Dr. Aris said, his voice entirely devoid of legal theater, purely rooted in scientific fact. He tapped the keyboard of the computer connected to the microscope. "Well, the petitioner claims this document was drafted, printed, and signed on October 14th, 2018. We ran the paper composition, the ink absorption, and the toner fusion." "And the signature?" I asked, looking at the large high-definition monitor mounted on the wall. "The signature is genuine ink," Dr. Aris confirmed, bringing up a magnified image of my name. "But it wasn't written on this specific piece of paper. Then you can see the micro-abrasions where a high-resolution laser printer deposited toner particles over the microscopic fibers of the paper to replicate the blue ink of an original signature. It's a very high-end optical forgery, but that isn't the fatal error." He clicked his mouse, shifting the microscopic view away from the signature and onto the blank, white space of the paper itself. At first, I saw nothing but the textured grain of the paper. Then, Dr. Aris activated a heavy ultraviolet light array mounted above the table. The monitor suddenly illuminated with a microscopic, perfectly geometric grid of tiny yellow dots scattered across the white space. "Machine identification code," Dr. Aris stated, pointing a pen at the screen. Printer steganography. Since the late 1990s, almost every commercial laser printer manufacturers embeds a microscopic, invisible grid of yellow dots onto every single page it prints. It's a tracking mechanism developed in cooperation with the federal government to trace counterfeit currency. He typed a command into the terminal, running the dot matrix through a decryption algorithm. A string of raw data populated on the right side of the screen. The dot pattern encodes the exact serial number of the printer and the precise timestamp of when the page was generated, Dr. Aris explained, reading the data. This piece of paper wasn't printed in October 2018. The steganography confirms this document was printed on a Brother HLL 8360CDW laser printer, serial number ending in 409X, exactly 6 days ago, last Thursday at 4:12 p.m. I stared at the decoded timestamp on the monitor. The trap was no longer theoretical. It was a mathematical, scientific certainty. I need that printed in a sworn, certified forensic affidavit, I said, the coldness returning to my voice. And I need it by tomorrow morning. The wall clock behind the judge's bench read exactly 9 a.m. The second hand swept forward with a faint, rhythmic, mechanical click. I had exactly 8 hours before the automated corporate payroll system attempted to pull $120,000 from my frozen operating account. If the levy wasn't lifted by 5 p.m., the system would default, triggering a cascade of automated alerts to the State Labor Board, my supply chain vendors, and the commercial credit bureaus. The heavy wooden doors of courtroom 302 swung shut, sealing off the ambient noise of the courthouse hallway. The air inside smelled of stale floor wax and old paper. I sat at the respondent's table next to Marcus. I didn't have a notepad. I didn't have a pen. Resting directly in front of me, perfectly aligned with the edge of the scratched wooden table, was a single sealed white envelope bearing the embossed crest of the Sterling Forensic Laboratory. Elise sat 10 feet away at the petitioner's table. She wasn't looking at the judge. She was looking at me. The manufactured sympathy she had weaponized at the cafe yesterday was entirely gone, replaced by a rigid, impatient anticipation. Her lawyer, a man named Caldwell who smelled faintly of cheap mints and expensive cologne, was organizing his files with rapid, aggressive movements. And he looked like a man who believed he was 5 minutes away from securing a 30% contingency fee on a $650,000 settlement. Judge presiding over the civil docket, a 60-year-old magistrate named Barrett, took the bench. He didn't slam a gavel. He simply sat down, adjusted a microphone, and opened the thick manila file containing my frozen life. Docket number 814C, emergency hearing to review an ex parte writ of attachment, Judge Barrett announced, and his voice carrying the flat, exhausted cadence of a man who processed 50 financial disputes a week. Counsel, I signed this freeze order on Tuesday based on a sworn affidavit and a physical promissory note indicating an imminent flight risk of capital. The respondent is now present. Mr. Caldwell, does your client wish to maintain the levy? Caldwell stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He leaned into the microphone, projecting his voice to ensure the entire gallery could hear the accusation. We do, Your Honor, Caldwell stated firmly. In fact, we are requesting the court convert the temporary attachment into an immediate judgment and order the disbursement of funds. The respondent has made absolutely no effort to post a surety bond. She has offered no alternative collateral. Furthermore, we attempted to resolve this matter amicably yesterday afternoon, offering a structured settlement to avoid disrupting her commercial payroll. And the respondent refused to sign. Caldwell lifted the unsigned settlement agreement from his desk and gestured with it. Her refusal to negotiate, combined with her frozen liquid assets, proves the exact volatility my client outlined in her initial affidavit, Caldwell continued, building his narrative brick by brick. The debt is valid. The signature on the 2018 promissory note is undeniably hers. If the court lifts this levy today, those funds will be wired offshore by nightfall. No, and my client will be permanently defrauded of her $500,000 loan." Judge Barrett took notes on his legal pad, his expression giving nothing away. He set his pen down and looked across the room at our table. "Counsel for the respondent," Judge Barrett prompted. "Your client's commercial accounts are completely locked. You haven't filed for a bond. Are you prepared to offer a defense against the validity of the debt, or are we moving to disbursement?" Marcus stood up, and he didn't adjust his jacket. He didn't perform for the gallery. He picked up the sealed white envelope from the table in front of me. "We are not offering a bond, Your Honor, because there is no debt to secure," Marcus said, his voice quiet, forcing the judge to lean forward slightly to hear him. "We are filing an emergency motion to dissolve the writ of attachment immediately with prejudice, on the grounds of catastrophic fraud upon the court." The scratch of Caldwell's pen at the opposing table stopped instantly. Elise shifted in her chair, a sudden sharp movement. "Fraud upon the court is a heavy accusation, counselor," Judge Barrett warned, his tone instantly losing its morning exhaustion, replaced by a sharp judicial focus. "You are looking at a signed promissory note." "We are looking at a high-resolution optical forgery, Your Honor," Marcus corrected him smoothly. Now he walked around the wooden table, approached the clerk, and handed over the envelope. "We utilized the court's subpoena yesterday to transfer the physical document from Mr. Caldwell's firm directly to the Sterling Forensic Laboratory for non-destructive material analysis. I am submitting Exhibit A, a sworn certified forensic affidavit from Dr. Aris, a former Treasury Materials engineer." Caldwell practically jumped out of his chair, the leather squeaking loudly against the wood. "Objection!" Your Honor," Caldwell barked, his voice pitching upward. "This is a last-minute ambush. We haven't been provided a copy of this supposed lab report. This is a transparent delay tactic designed to stall the disbursement while she liquidates her corporate credit lines." "The clerk is handing you a copy right now, Mr. Caldwell," Marcus said, not even looking at him. Judge Barrett broke the seal on the envelope. He pulled out the heavy cardstock pages of the forensic report. The courtroom went entirely silent. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the rustle of the paper as the judge turned to the second page. I watched Caldwell receive his copy from the bailiff. He flipped quickly past the introduction, scanning the technical jargon. Elise leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the paragraphs, trying to understand the dense, scientific text. Dr. Aris examined the signature under a binocular stereo microscope, Marcus explained, on addressing the bench while Caldwell read. "The ink of the signature is genuine. However, the forensic analysis confirms that the signature was digitally isolated from a separate document and subsequently overprinted onto the current page using a commercial laser printer. The toner particles rest on top of the paper fibers, not absorbed into them." "That's a theoretical opinion paid for by a desperate defendant," Caldwell interrupted, his confidence cracking. "We're realizing the physical mechanics of his case were being dismantled in real time. My client testified under oath that the document was signed in her presence in October of 2018. Judge Barrett didn't look up from the report. He was reading page 3, the page containing the decrypted steganography. "Is it your client's sworn testimony, Mr. Caldwell?" Judge Barrett asked, his voice suddenly dropping into a register of cold, absolute danger, "or that this specific piece of paper was physically printed and executed in October of 2018? Caldwell hesitated. The survival instinct of a litigator kicked in. He looked at the judge's face, then looked down at the forensic report in his hands, finally reaching the section detailing the machine identification code. That is the date on the document, Your Honor," Caldwell stammered, physically stepping an inch away from Elise. "I didn't ask what the date on the document says. Our counselor," Judge Barrett snapped, the air in the courtroom instantly freezing. He held up the forensic report, pointing directly at the high-resolution photograph of the illuminated yellow dot matrix. I am reading a certified material analysis of the printer steganography embedded in this paper. The decryption algorithm confirms this exact document was generated on a Brother laser printer, serial number ending in 409X. It was printed exactly 6 days ago. Last Thursday, at 4:12 p.m. Elise stopped breathing. The color drained from her face so fast she looked physically ill. She stared at the forensic report on the table, her mind failing to process how an invisible grid of yellow dots had just detonated her flawless $600,000 extortion plot. Judge Barrett dropped the report onto his bench. He looked directly at Elise, his eyes entirely devoid of sympathy. "Ms. Harding," the judge said, the heavy silence of the room amplifying every syllable. "You submitted an affidavit to this court. You swore under penalty of perjury that a document printed 6 days ago was actually signed 7 years ago to secure a $500,000 freeze on the respondent's bank accounts." Elise opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Caldwell, silently begging her lawyer to fix the unfixable. Caldwell slowly placed his pen down on the table. He didn't look at his client. He looked at the judge, realizing he was currently standing in the blast radius of a massive, multi-count felony perjury charge. The silence in courtroom 302 was heavy, pressing down on the petitioner's table like physical weight. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to echo louder against the wood-paneled walls. Caldwell stood up. He didn't look at Elise. He didn't look at me or Marcus. He looked directly at the court reporter, ensuring his next words were perfectly transcribed into the official, to permanent judicial record. "Your Honor," Caldwell said, his voice stripped of all its previous aggressive theater, now flat and incredibly careful. "I must formally move to withdraw as counsel for the petitioner, effective immediately. I am bound by the rules of professional conduct. I must state for the record that the document submitted as Exhibit A was provided directly by the client. My firm relied entirely on her explicit, sworn representations regarding its authenticity. We had zero prior knowledge of the forensic anomalies detailed in Dr. Eris's report." Elise turned to him, her eyes wide, the panic finally breaking through her paralysis. "What are you doing?" Elise whispered frantically, reaching out to grab the sleeve of his suit. "You can't just leave me here. You said this was airtight." Caldwell pulled his arm away, taking a physical half-step back from her. He was looking at a potential disbarment and federal conspiracy charges. And his duty to his client had evaporated the exact second the printer's steganography proved she had used him to commit a felony. "Motion to withdraw is granted," Judge Barrett stated, his tone devoid of any sympathy. He looked at Caldwell. "Step away from the table, counselor. You are dismissed from this proceeding, but you will remain in the gallery. I am impounding your entire case file." Caldwell quickly gathered his briefcase and walked to the back row of the wooden benches, or sitting down heavily, entirely abandoning the woman he had been vigorously defending 2 minutes prior. Elise was now completely alone at the petitioner's table. The $650,000 settlement she had gloated about at the Mercer Cafe was gone. The leverage was gone. "Ms. Harding," Judge Barrett addressed her, his voice carrying the clinical, administrative chill of a surgeon preparing to amputate, "you have presented a fabricated document to this court. You have sworn a false affidavit under penalty of perjury. You have weaponized the civil injunction process to maliciously freeze commercial accounts." Judge Barrett turned his attention to the court clerk sitting below his bench. "The ex parte writ of attachment issued on Tuesday is hereby dissolved with extreme prejudice," the judge dictated, the keystrokes of the clerk clacking rapidly in the quiet room. "The clerk will transmit the immediate release order to the respondent's financial institutions. The levy is lifted." I looked at the wall clock. It was 9:18 a.m. The payroll wire would clear exactly on time. My supply chain was secure. The immediate biological threat to my company was neutralized. but I didn't nod in relief. I didn't pack up my leather portfolio. I stayed perfectly still, watching Marcus. While we hadn't spent $25,000 on emergency forensic labs and expedited legal fees just to walk away evenly, Marcus remained standing at the respondent's table. "Your Honor," Marcus interjected, his voice maintaining its steady, professional cadence. "The respondent moves for immediate sanctions under Rule 11 of the Civil Rules of Procedure regarding frivolous and fraudulent filings. The petitioner's actions were not a misunderstanding. They were a calculated, predatory strike against a commercial entity requiring emergency capital expenditure to defend." Judge Barrett looked up from his paperwork, nodding slowly. "Proceed, Counselor. List the damages." Marcus opened his folder. "We request an immediate order holding Elise Harding personally liable for all costs incurred in dismantling this fraud. This includes the $10,000 emergency retainer for the Sterling Forensic Laboratory, the $15,000 expedited legal fee for my firm, and an additional punitive sanction of $50,000 for malicious interference with a commercial payroll." Elise gasped, her hands gripping the edge of the scratched wooden table. The math was reversing in real time. She had walked into the courthouse expecting a six-figure payout. Now she was staring down the barrel of a $75,000 immediate judicial debt. "I don't have that kind of money," Elise blurted out, her voice cracking, breaking every rule of courtroom decorum. She looked desperately at the judge. "I'm unemployed. I put my last $10,000 on a credit card just to retain Mr. Caldwell. I can't pay sanctions." Judge Barrett stared at her over the top of his reading glasses. "Insolvency is not a defense against sanctions for perjury, Ms. Harding," Judge Barrett replied coldly. "If you cannot pay the judgment, the respondent is fully authorized to place a lien on your personal property, garnish your future wages, and seize any vehicles or assets in your name until the debt is satisfied." The judge picked up his pen and signed the order Marcus had prepared. "The motion for Rule 11 sanctions is granted in full," Judge Barrett announced, stamping the paper with the heavy municipal seal. $75,000 awarded to the respondent, payable immediately. Elise began to shake. Her breathing became shallow and erratic. When she looked across the 10 feet of empty space separating our tables, she looked at me. "Please," Elise whispered, her voice a ragged, humiliating plea. The arrogance she had worn like armor at the cafe yesterday was completely shattered. "Please don't do this. I'll drop the whole thing. Just cancel the sanctions. If you take my car and my savings, I'll be homeless. I'm your sister." I met her eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't offer a dramatic speech about betrayal. And I simply looked at her with the detached clinical precision of an auditor finalizing a balance sheet. She had tried to burn my 75 employees to the ground for a payout. She had tried to suffocate my life's work. The biological accident of our shared DNA was an entirely irrelevant data point. I didn't say a single word. I let the silence in the courtroom answer her. Judge Barrett gathered the physical promissory note, the sworn affidavit, and the forensic report, placing them into a thick red folder. "We are not finished, Ms. Harding," Judge Barrett said, his voice cutting through her panic and shutting down any further attempts to negotiate with me. "The civil matter of the debt and the sanctions is resolved, but the court cannot ignore the mechanics of the forgery itself." The judge looked directly at the bailiff standing by the door. "I am officially impounding Exhibit A and the corresponding forensic report," Judge Barrett declared, the finality of his words echoing off the walls. "I am directing the clerk of the court to forward this entire dossier directly to the district attorney's office with a judicial recommendation for immediate criminal indictment. You are facing felony charges for perjury, forgery in the first degree, and attempted grand larceny." Elise let out a hollow, suffocating sound, sinking back into her chair as the true, inescapable weight of the federal system locked around her. Now the bailiff stepped forward, crossing the well of the courtroom to collect the forged promissory note and the forensic affidavit from Judge Barrett's bench. He placed the documents into a heavy plastic evidence bag, sealed it with tamper-evident tape, and logged the chain of custody on a clipboard. It was a mundane, bureaucratic action, but the sound of the plastic sealing shut echoed like a vault door closing on Elisa's life. She remained slumped in the wooden chair at the petitioner's table. And she didn't look at me. She stared blankly at the scratched surface of the wood, her hands trembling violently. The calculated, predatory woman who had sipped a latte 24 hours ago and demanded $650,000 no longer existed. In her place was a federal suspect carrying a $75,000 immediate civil judgment, abandoned by her legal counsel, waiting for the district attorney to file the arrest warrant. Judge Barrett picked up his gavel. He didn't offer a moral lecture. The judicial system is not a pulpit. It is a mechanism. "This matter is concluded," Judge Barrett stated, signaling to the clerk. "Call the next case." Marcus closed his legal pad and slid it into his briefcase. I picked up the sealed envelope that had contained the forensic report. We stood up in unison, pushed through the swinging wooden gate, and walked down the center aisle of courtroom 302. I did not turn my head as I passed the petitioner's table. I did not offer a final word of warning or a sympathetic glance. Pity is a useless emotion in a financial war, and gloating is a vulnerability. I pushed open the heavy wooden double doors and stepped out into the bright, fluorescent-lit hallway of the courthouse. The air immediately felt lighter. "The clerk just transmitted the release order to the county clearinghouse," Marcus said, checking his phone as we walked toward the elevators. "The bank will receive the electronic notification in approximately 45 minutes. Your accounts will be completely unrestored before the end of the business day. File the lien against her vehicle and her personal checking account the second the $75,000 judgment is officially entered into the county ledger," I instructed, watching the elevator numbers count down. "Do not wait for her to attempt a voluntary payment plan. She doesn't have the liquidity. Insecure the collateral." "The paperwork is already drafted," Marcus confirmed, stepping into the elevator car. "We will execute the seizure by Monday morning." I walked out of the brutalist concrete courthouse and got into my car. The freezing November rain had finally stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective under the overcast sky. I arrived back at the Corporate Logistics Center at 2:15 p.m. The warehouse floor was a symphony of automated conveyor belts, forklifts, and dispatch radios. The 75 employees were moving freight, entirely unaware that 6 hours ago, their livelihoods had been placed on the chopping block by a fabricated piece of paper. I walked up the steel stairs to the executive mezzanine and entered my office. I bypassed the stack of supply chain reports on my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. I logged directly into the bank's secure web portal. The loading wheel spun. The dashboard populated. The bold red padlock icons were gone. The restrictive warning banners had been erased. Available balance, $1,420,500. Status, active. I clicked on the payroll tab. The pending automated transfer for $120,000 was sitting in the queue, waiting for the 5 p.m. clearance window. I didn't wait. I manually highlighted the batch file, entered my secure alphanumeric authentication code, and clicked Execute. The screen refreshed. A green checkmark appeared. Transaction approved. Funds dispersed. And the quarterly taxes were paid. The employee direct deposits were locked in. The company machinery continued to turn, operating with the cold, relentless efficiency I had built it to achieve. The threat had been entirely digested and neutralized. The dismantling of Elise Harding was not a sudden explosion. It was a systematic, grinding, institutional process. The $75,000 sanction awarded by Judge Barrett was not a theoretical penalty. It was a legally binding debt. It was by 9 a.m. on Monday, Marcus had filed the paperwork to execute the judgment. Elise, having maxed out her credit to hire her former lawyer, had zero liquid capital to pay the court order. The consequences of civil insolvency are immediate and physical. A county sheriff arrived at Elise's apartment on Tuesday morning with a flatbed tow truck and a writ of execution. They seized her brand-new camel hair designer coat, the electronics in her living room, and the financed luxury sedan she had driven to the Mercer Cafe. Her personal bank accounts were hit with a hard garnishment, freezing her remaining $200, and a permanent lien was attached to her Social Security number, guaranteeing that 25% of any future wages she earned would be automatically diverted directly into my corporate holding accounts until the $75,000, plus standard state interest, was paid in full. So her credit score was effectively reduced to ash, but the financial ruin was only the preliminary phase of her collapse. The district attorney's office did not ignore Judge Barrett's referral. The physical evidence was entirely insurmountable. The steganography grid, the invisible yellow tracking dots left by the Brother HLL8360CDW laser printer, provided the prosecution with an exact, decrypted timestamp of the forgery. It proved premeditation, malice, and criminal intent to defraud the court. Elise was indicted by a grand jury on 3 felony counts: first-degree forgery, perjury, and attempted grand larceny. Because the target of the theft exceeded $500,000, the state sentencing guidelines were severe. Facing a guaranteed conviction at trial due to the forensic material analysis, the public defender assigned to her case advised her to take a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to felony, forgery, and perjury. She was sentenced to 4 years in a minimum security state correctional facility, followed by 5 years of heavily monitored financial probation. She had engineered a flawless plan to steal $650,000 by holding my company hostage. She forgot that the paper she printed her extortion on was keeping its own meticulous record of her crime. My logistics company closed the fourth quarter with a 22% increase in gross revenue. When the employee bonuses cleared on time, my accounts remained secure. If your sibling forged a $500,000 promissory note, secretly filed it with a civil judge, and froze all of your personal and business bank accounts just hours before a massive payroll deadline, what would you do? Would you panic and agree to sign an extortion settlement just to keep your company alive? Or would you bypass the negotiations, hire a forensic materials engineer to mathematically dismantle the forgery, or watch the court system liquidate their entire life? Let me know exactly how you would handle this level of financial treason in the comments below. If you love this story of cold, calculated, and forensic justice, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.